Deconstructing the continuity of the self. We can now look at science's deconstruction of the second characteristic of the self, continuity. Robert Ornstein, for example, dismisses our sense of self-consistency as an illusion. He says, quote, "We are not the same person from moment to moment. We are not the same self at all. Such diversity can be witnessed all the time outside the lab. For example, when we don't know whether to trust our first intuitive response or to follow our more deliberated plan of action. What we might call intuition or subliminal perception may be the receipt of information by a center inaccessible to consciousness. We assume that we are more consistent, more unified than we are. We do so because the self itself is just another one of the many simpletons inside the brain with its own limited role and insight. The idea most people have that they are consistent in the diverse situations of their lives is an illusion. The consistency in which we believe so much is not us any more than our panic reaction is us. Both are just small, secluded and separate sections of the mind, with no special access to the rest of mental processes. Isolated, usually uncoordinated and alone, each section has restricted knowledge. The restriction on information underlies why, although we act wildly differently in special situations, we maintain a constant illusion of our personal unity and stability. But our personal judgment is wrong. We are not consistent, not stable. It is only our little self who believes so." End quote. David Rose refers to Derek Parfit's metaphor of the self as a club. Quote, "Over time, some members may leave and other new people may join, but it remains the same club. Thus, there is unity over time, although the constituents may change as the membership changes. A club is not a physical thing. It is the sum total of the individual members. Likewise, the self is just the sum total of all an individual's various faculties, modules, properties, and experience. And there is no special one internal to that collection that is the real self. Over time, a person may learn new skills and forget many things too, but the continuity of self is maintained. The self is a higher level category, the total set of all one's mental states, rather than a subset or a particular member of them." End quote. Daniel Dennett extended Parfit's metaphor by wondering whether the club of the self has a written constitution, which would explicitly provide for its lapses of existence. But Dennett concludes this wouldn't guarantee any real inherent identity for the self. He says, quote, "We might know all the facts that could conceivably bear on the situation and be able to see that they were inconclusive about the identity of the brackets new club. Selves are not independently existing soul pearls, but artifacts of the social processes that create us, and like other such artifacts, subject to sudden shifts in status. The only momentum that accrues to the trajectory of a self or a club is the stability imparted to it by the web of beliefs that constitute it. And when those beliefs lapse, it lapses, either permanently or temporarily, end quote. In other words, Dennett sees the self as sustained by a scaffolding of social and propositional networks, rather than by anything biologically internal to the human organism itself. Rose concludes that, quote, when it comes to the self, Dennett describes it as merely the center of narrative gravity. It is not a specific entity in the same way that the center of gravity of a physical object is not a real thing. The latter is a useful shorthand for describing the behavior of a mass, such as a planet or a piece of metal. It has certain functional uses, but it is just a convenient fiction to describe and predict the behavior of the object. Similarly, when it comes to people, the self or center of narrative gravity is a convenient fiction to summarize a person's behavior, feelings, and thoughts. It is a central character in the narrative that is made up through the multiple drafts. The central theme in the story that is that person's mental life, end quote.